Hello again, it's Miss Jones from Sew with Miss Jones. We're going to practice your hand stitching today, and in order to do that you need to have some of your scraps, and I'll tell you how big to cut those in just a second. You're going to need your little bag that has your needle and your embroidery floss in it. You need a pair of scissors, and you need your guide sheet. And this is a little piece of cardboard. You don't have to use cardboard. You don't even have to do this step, but I'm going to tell you it makes working with floss a whole lot simpler. So I'm going to start by undoing this, and I'm going to use my paper scissors, not my fabric scissors. So I'm just going to cut that apart. And I have my embroidery floss right here. So I'm going to move some things out of the way for right now, and we're going to take a look at your embroidery floss to start with. Okay, I'm going to take the two little slip things off the end like that, and if you'll notice, this is a circle. See how that is? And I want to tell you, if you just start pulling on this, you're going to have it's going to be a big pain. This is where the cardboard comes in. I'm going to find one of the ends, because there should be two different ends, and I'm actually going to slip this on my wrist. And I'm trying to keep it away from my watch. If you have a watch or bracelet on, you might want to take it off completely. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little piece of cardboard. You could use a piece of paper that's folded up so it's pretty thick. You could use a note card that's folded in half, just so it's a little bit thicker. This is just a chunk of a box that I had around the house that I cut a chunk off. All right, so what I'm going to do is, leaving it on my wrist, I am wrapping it around and around here. And this is to help it keep from being tangled. At school, sometimes what I will do is, if somebody empties a spool like this one's got thread on it, but say this was empty, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just wrap my embroidery floss around that, because that helps me keep it from being tangled whenever I am working at it with it. If you just grab the end and start pulling, you're going to have a big nasty mess. And if you notice, my loop's getting smaller. Again, I'm trying to keep it away from my watch. And around and around and around. We're almost there. I think my puppy's mad because I'm not paying attention to her right now. She's whining a little bit. Alrighty, I'm almost done. Okay, I've got it all wound up. This stuff's going to go in the trash. Right, so then one of the things that I need is my needle. I'm not going to take it out yet. And I need my pieces of scrap felt. So what I've tried to do is take the smaller of the two pieces, is not quite 3 inches long, and that's just because that's how big my scrap was, but you need to be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 inches long to practice with. And then my gray piece is just a little bit bigger than that, so that I have an edge to connect to. And I'm going to take a pin. You might need to put 2 in, just because you may have smaller ones than me. I'm just going to put 1 down the middle. And so I have my piece like that. And that's where I'm going to do my practice. Okay? So let's get our needle ready. Here's a thing. Once you take your needle out of here, you should never lay this down on the table by itself. It will disappear. And this needle is a really nice one with a big eye. This is meant for embroidery. So this is going to make it a whole lot easier for you to do your work. And you're probably wondering, well, Miss Jones, why do you have your stuff sitting on a pillow? For a couple of reasons. One of them is it helps me keep it in the frame. And the other reason is it's a little bit closer to me while I'm doing this work. So I need a piece of thread. Remember, I'm not going to lay that down, so I'm just going to stick that into the edge of my fabric to hold on to it for the time being. And then I'm going to measure out a piece of thread that goes from my fingertips up to my elbow. Really don't make it much bigger than that because this is a good size piece of thread. If it's much longer than that, you're going to end up with problems. So I'm just going to clip it, and then I'm going to set this aside. Now, our project, this has 6 threads in it. That's what embroidery floss does. It has 6 threads. Let me see if I can, I want to go in a little bit. Here we go. So it has 6 threads, and we're going to only use 2 at a time. That means we've got to separate this some way. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you grab the 2 ends and pull like this, just pull them apart, you're going to end up with a knot about halfway down. So there are a couple of things that you can do that'll make this just a little bit easier to do. Let me come out here just a little bit. Okay, so remember 2. There's 6 here. We're only going to use 2 into 6, or 6 divided by 2. That means we're going to get 3 chunks of thread out of this. So I've got 2 of them right here. I have 4 of them right here. And what I'm going to do is I can very carefully, if you notice I'm grabbing onto this at the bottom. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want this to get all tangled up. So I have the 2 up here in my hand, 2 of them here, 4 of them there. And I'm going to pull that apart, and I'm just sliding my finger down that and keeping it from tangling as I go. So there's a chunk, 2 threads. Now let's just practice that again, because remember, we don't want to accidentally use 4. It'll make your project look uneven. All right, so now I have 2 and 2. I'm going to put both of those in this hand right here, and then I'm going to take my other hand, and I'm just sliding that through my fingers. Sliding it through my fingers until I get down to the other end. So I now have 3 chunks, and I'm just going to set those off to the side because I'm going to use them later. And then I have my needle all ready to go. So first of all, I want to tell you, I don't like licking the end of the needle. It makes it kind of nasty. And in class, if you ever lick your thread and then you want me to help you, I won't do it because I don't want to touch your spit. And I'm not going to spit on it because you wouldn't want to touch my spit. So here we go. There are 2 different ways that you can thread a needle. One of them is called threading the needle, and the other one's called needling the thread. So when you're threading the needle, you're going to hold it really close to the end. Let me see if I can scoot in just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I'm really, really close to the end. You don't want a big flappy thing like this because it's like trying to put a piece of cooked spaghetti through the holes in your, or the eyelet holes on your shoes. So I'm going to hold it really, really close to the end. Then I'm going to put it right next to my needle. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to mush the ends together. This is hard for me to do so far away from my face. I like to do it a whole lot closer to my face. All right, I pushed it through. I got it through. My fingers are still there. Before I let go, I'm going to pull straight through. Okay, let me try that again. All right, so I'm going to hold it really close to the end, just like that. And if you need to, you can push the 2 ends together, or if they're really fuzzy, you can take the scissors and clip them off. And then you push through both ends and you keep your fingers going and grab it on the other side. That's one way you can do it. That's called threading the needle. On the other hand, one thing that I've seen other people do is they hold the thread in their non-dominant hand, again, real close to the end, and they take the needle in their dominant hand, and this is called needling the thread. So what you do here is you get the needle right on top of the thread, and this is a little harder for me because I don't usually do it this way. Yeah. This is when I'm going to clip. Oh my goodness, I put my needle down. All right, so I'm going to push it on my thread. Okay? And then again, you grab it as soon as it's on the other side and pull it through. So you can either thread your needle or needle your thread. Okay, now it's time to tie the knot. When I was first learning to sew, I was taught to make pretty tiny knots because my teacher wanted my knots to be pretty on the inside, of course not show on the outside. Knots should never go on the outside unless you're doing French knots, and then they're on the outside. So here's what I do. I'm going to take my thumb and my finger of my dominant hand, and I'm going to grab the end of the thread. And I'm going to wrap it around 2 times. Okay? And then I'm going to pretend like I have something kind of gooey on the end of my finger, and I'm going to rub my fingers back and forth and back and forth and back and forth till I get to the end. Now I have a little loop underneath my finger, and I'm going to pull back, and I've got a big ugly knot. And that's okay, because it's going to be on the inside. Nobody's going to see it. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to take the end of my thread in my dominant hand between my finger and my thumb. All right, I'm close to the end. I'm going to wrap it around my finger twice, and then just think about having something gooey between your fingers, and you're trying to wiggle it off your fingers. Okay, I now have it almost off the end of my fingertip, and I'm just going to start very gently pulling back until I have a knot. And it's big and ugly. Now, this is not the kind of knot that I learned how to make when I was first learning how to sew. This is one I had to learn later when I was teaching, because it was hard for kids to make a small knot, and that's okay. This one is a lot less likely to pull through. So we are good to go. I've got a knot. I've got my needle threaded, and now I'm going to show you how to do the whip stitch. Okay, I have highlighted on my guide sheet where it says hand stitching. You can put a circle around it, or just figure out where it is. It's on the front page of this pattern. And then I've come down to here, and it says Overcast. In here it says that I'm supposed to put this all together by hand, and I'm supposed to have stitches that are about an 1/8 inch in from the edge. Okay, and about an 1/8 of an inch from the in length. So for Overcast, it says put the needle in from the bottom. So we're going to come up from the back about an 1/8 of an inch from the edge and an 1/8 of an inch from the end. Okay? Push up through to the top, bring the needle back to the underneath an 1/8 of an inch ahead of the previous stitch, and push back through to the top. So we're always going to be going from the bottom to the top, from the bottom to the top, from the bottom to the top. But remember, we start on the bottom because we don't want this knot to show on the outside. It really makes it look messy if you do. Okay, so here's a little diagram. These look like they're really close together, and those are probably even more than an 1/8 of an inch apart. So if you look at your little ruler here, this is a 1/2 of an inch, this is a 1/4 of an inch, and so your 1/8 of an inch is going to be halfway between the two of those. It's pretty small. Alrighty? One of the reasons why we practice is because when we first start sewing, a lot of times we will make our stitches really big, and we need to practice to get them smaller. So I've got my 2 pieces of felt with a pin holding them together, and remember, I'm supposed to come in about an 1/8 of an inch from the edge and about an 1/8 of an inch in from this edge. So I'm going to come up from the back about like that. Okay, so bottom to top. Then I'm going to go about an 1/8 of an inch here, bottom to top. And again, I'm going to make my mark. And if you're worried that you're not doing it the right length, then you can do a couple of things. You could put some marks on the end of your fingers so you could kind of check it each time. You don't want them as big as your pinky this time. That's way too big. We want them a little bit smaller than that. So about an 1/8 of an inch away, bottom to top, bottom to top, And what you're trying to do is make them about the same width this way and also about the same distance apart. So what do you do if you make a great big one, or you make one that's too close together? All right, so I'm going to pretend I went too far ahead and I'm like that. Okay? Now I don't want my project to look like that because it's really not the same size. And I guess you could try to go back and make another one, but then you're going to have an X on the top. So here's what you do. Unthread the needle. All right? I usually try not to use the point, but I will take the eye of the needle and I slide it under there really carefully and pull it back out. Then, of course, I do have to thread my needle again. Let me get that going. Back through there. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of times when students are, because we're only using one thread, we did not tie the two ends together. That would make your thread way too short. So you've got a short tail and a long tail, and we don't want the short tail to get caught down here. So we do have to kind of let it slide up every once in a while. But what we don't want to do is act like we're going to have tea with a queen. Okay? You don't want to pull it up like this every time with your fingers like that, because you'll end up unthreading it. So what you do is you have this between your finger and your pointer finger and your thumb, and you're going to go down. Remember, you're going about 1/8 of an inch apart and up. And when I pull up, I don't pull up like this. I wrap my fingers around the thread, and when I pull up, it does not come loose. So let me do that again. I go down about 1/8 of an inch away and up, and I wrap my fingers around that thread, so when I pull it up, it doesn't come undone. The other thing that you don't want to do is pull too tight here. We want these to just kind of lay on the top. They shouldn't be loopy, but they should be nice and neat along the top here, not too tight. If you make them too tight, they're going to pucker, and we don't want that to happen. All right, so I'm just going to stitch a little bit more, and then I'm going to show you what to do when you either run out of thread or when you get to the end of a spot where you're sewing. Oh, and my stitches are getting smaller. This is why we practice, because we really want to try to make sure that they're all about the same size and the same distance. You notice I got a couple of longer ones in here. These are probably a little bit better. Okay, so let's pretend I'm at the end, or my thread is too short. And what do I mean by too short? If your thread is shorter than 3 inches, that's this much. When your thread gets that short, you need to stop and tie a knot, because it's going to be a whole lot harder to tie a knot after that. And you can't really tie the two ends of the knot or the thread together. You can't like tie a new one on. You have to stop, tie a knot, and then start over again. All right, so I have my needle right next to the edge, like I'm going to the back, which is what I'm going to do, because of course my knots are always on the back. Okay, now, if you notice, there are some little threads right here. When we tie the knot, we do not want it to show on the front. So I'm going to slide my needle right under that thread. Oh, let's move in. Can we see this? So I'm going to slide my needle right underneath that thread. And I'm going to make a little loop. And then I want to take my needle and go through that loop and then pull it tight. And then I'm going to do it again. It's best if you do this 3 times. Oh, and there's my needle came undone. So I'm only going to do it twice this time. But 2 to 3 times is good. That will help you keep it from coming undone. All right? So I'm going to put my needle back in here because I don't want to lose it. So now I got this longer thread, and what I want to do then is cut this not right next to the knot, but leave about 1/4 of an inch. Alrighty? So leave about 1/4 of an inch, just like that. That way it's not so long that it'll get tangled up in other things, but it's short enough, or it's not too short that it'll come undone. Alrighty? So What you need to do now is, before you actually start working on your project, you need to practice stitching all the way around the outside of this piece of felt, and work really hard on making them the same size and the same distance apart, the same amount in from the edge, and then you'll be ready to start stitching on your project, because these are really going to show, and you want to make sure that they look nice. Bye for now.